Hyperspace was stable until humanity fell in love with it. Now the galaxy's greatest superhighway has taken an unexpected turn. There's a price to pay for that faster-than-light travel. The preposterous riders get a little too competitive, and an essential medium for interdimensional transit goes on a dangerously fluctuating wobble. Mankind enters the Galactic Federation and promptly transforms hyperspace, the celestial highways between stars, into new racetracks for fast and dangerous the hyperspace hellions motor from dimension to dimension as they wreak havoc on the fabric of interstellar travel. When Commander Arya Blackwood finds out, she learns that the racers aren't just thrill-seeking idiots, they're actually uncovering the truth that hyperspace has been slowly falling apart for thousands of years. The humans, by racing recklessly through it, figure out how to control and ultimately balance hyperspace, preventing the galaxy from collapsing. Their dangerous experiments rewrite the rulebook on space travel and take us closer to a breaking point. But they ensure that, sometimes, breaking things is the only way to make them better. Commander Arya Blackwood had witnessed the deaths of 17 star systems, had stood in her cabin watching as each collapsed into quantum foam. But they didn't prepare her for the Meridian Nebula folding in upon itself like origami made of light and time. The alarms of the hyperspace monitoring station were already screeching warnings so dire they froze her blood. But what scared her most of all was the laughter crackling over the comm channels. Human laughter. 3 months ago, hyperspace had been the most predictably stable thing in the galaxy. For 12 millennia, every race in known space had honored their entrance into hyperspace as the natural marvel it was. The Altarians fashioned temples to the dimensional highways. Hyperspace travel was a sacred ritual to the Zenthrock, who would meditate for 3 days before making a jump. Even the warmongering critics would cease their battles to preserve the sanctity of hyperspace. That was before humanity became part of the Galactic Federation. Arya remembered the day perfectly. She had been an ensign on the research vessel Quantum Dawn, performing routine hyperspace stability measurements in the outer rim for decades. The readings had been the same. Smooth, predictable waves moving through 11 dimensions like some cosmic river whose course had been fixed since the beginning of time. The first oddity had appeared while Dr. Marcus Chen, the chief physicist of the expedition, had been reviewing the data. A tiny blip, barely detectable by their instruments, but clearly unnatural. The medium of hyperspace had been agitated by something in a way that was physically impossible according to all known laws of interdimensional physics. Captain Chen had said, his voice high with tension, "We cannot ignore this. If hyperspace collapses, every species in the galaxy that can travel faster than light could be stranded." They had traced the interference to a small asteroid belt not far from the Terran colonies. There they found something that changed everything. 2 human ships were racing. But not just racing, drag racing right through hyperspace itself. Toying with the very fabric of the universe's faster-than-light travel like it was their favorite toy. They were young pilots, full of cocky disregard for the ripples their entertainment could theoretically kick up and unfurl across galaxies. The lead ship was flown by Jake Morrison, a 23-year-old ex-military pilot who'd been kicked out of the force for making unauthorized upgrades to his fighter. His ship, the Crimson Fury, was gutted of all but the necessities and outfitted with experimental hyperdrive engines that pushed more than a few safety limits. His rival was Cassandra Vale, a spectacularly gifted engineer who had abandoned the Terran Space Academy to experiment with what she called extreme dimensional mechanics. Her ship, the Void Dancer, was a thing of beauty, deadly, sleek as a stiletto, and driven by a hyperspace core that she'd cobbled together from salvaged alien tech. They'd been racing for 3 months already and were gaining a reputation. Other humans had begun to follow them, and the match race between 2 pilots had become an underground racing series that stretched across half the galaxy. They were the Hyperspace Hellions, and their slogan was straightforward: go fast, break reality. The trouble was, they were breaking reality in practice. Dr. Chen's original estimates had been conservative. He had calculated that their racing could cause minor ripples in local hyperspace. Nothing worse than a few ships experiencing jittery jumps. But with more and more humans joining the races, with the competitions becoming more intense, and with the human pilots pushing their ships further and faster, the disturbances increased exponentially. Hyperspace wasn't just a medium through which to travel, it was an organism. A vast matrix of interdimensional currents that linked every spot in the universe to every other. When humans raced, they weren't just racing across a void, charging through hyperspace. They created artificial eddies, carved new channels through the medium, and disrupted the patterns that had been stable for eons. The first major disaster had happened at the Vega system. A cargo ship on a routine run to deliver medical supplies to a colony suffering from a plague outbreak had dropped out of hyperspace 3 light-years short of its destination. "The dimensional pathways are gone," exclaimed the ship's grizzled hyperspace navigator. Instead of a well-defined channel in space to guide them through hyperspace, there was only turbulent energy that was impossible to navigate. 200,000 colonists died while waiting for medical supplies that never came. The second failure was worse. A luxury liner with 15,000 people on board was attempting a jump from the Centauri system to Earth. The vessel entered hyperspace without malfunction, but upon return, dropped out of hyperspace in reverse time. The travelers arrived at their destination 3 weeks before they had left, causing a temporal paradox that could only be resolved by the time crimes. Division of the Galactic Federation. The Federation didn't know what to think when the third failure occurred, the total destruction of an entire star system's hyperspace network, occurring spontaneously, and failed to discover the source until the wreckage at the destruction site was analyzed. The hyperspace Hellions had moved on from basic racing to an even more dangerous game, dimensional surfing. Jake Morrison had discovered that by surfing in the wake of hyperspace ripples, he could achieve velocities that would make traditional FTL travel look like a leisurely stroll. He'd begun intentionally creating disturbances in hyperspace and using those disturbances as a boost to drive his ship faster than anyone had ever thought possible. Other pilots copied him, and races became increasingly combat-like. Ships would collide with each other purposefully in hyperspace, creating massive disturbances that could be ridden to achieve incredible speeds. They called it wave riding, and it became the most popular spectator sport in human space. The Federation was swift in its response. They organized a task force to arrest the hyperspace Hellions and impound their ships. But the humans had learned to turn hyperspace itself into a weapon, raising artificial storms that would render their ships invisible to conventional sensors. The task force arrived to find nothing but empty space where the racing circuit was. It's supposed to be a signal broadcasting on all frequencies. You can't catch what you can't understand. The races continue. That's when the Federation sent for Commander Aria Blackwood. She'd spent 15 years studying hyperspace navigation, but nothing had prepared her for what the humans had accomplished. They had turned hyperspace from an orderly medium into a chaotic battlefield, and they were getting better at manipulating it all the time. She'd assembled a team of the galaxy's top hyperspace specialists. Dr. Chen, the man who'd made the original discovery, Lieutenant Commander Thane Coral, the Zenthrak warrior philosopher who knew more about hyperspace navigation than any living being, and Dr. Lydia Vasquez, the human physicist who'd been working on hyperspace theory long before the racing phenomenon had begun. Their mission: stop the hyperspace Hellions from destroying the galaxy's faster-than-light travel network. The first breakthrough came when Dr. Vasquez discovered that the human pilots weren't randomly destabilizing hyperspace, they were actually learning to manipulate it. Each race revealed new patterns, new possibilities, new ways to bend the underlying laws of physics. "They're not just racing," Vasquez said during a late-night strategy session. "They're evolving. Each race teaches them new techniques for exploiting hyperspace physics. At this rate, they'll be creating artificial wormholes within 6 months." The implications were staggering. If humans could learn to generate stable wormholes, they could theoretically jump instantaneously between any 2 points in the universe. But if they made a mistake, if they opened an unstable wormhole, they could tear a hole in the very fabric of reality. The plan was as complex as it was dangerous. They would plant a team member in the races to learn the humans' techniques and develop countermeasures that would dampen hyperspace disturbances, making racing impossible. Aria would infiltrate the races as a pilot herself, using a ship modified to match the capabilities of the human races while secretly recording their tactics. Dr. Chen would monitor hyperspace disturbances from a hidden observation post, mapping the patterns created by the races. Lieutenant Commander Coral would provide tactical support, using his hyperspace expertise to try to predict the racer's movements. Everything went according to plan until Aria met Jake Morrison. She had expected to find a reckless thrill-seeker, someone who raced for the adrenaline rush without regard for consequences. Instead, she found a prodigy pilot who understood hyperspace better than most Federation scientists, a man who'd developed an intuitive grasp of interdimensional physics that bordered on the supernatural. "You're not here for the racing," Jake said when they first met, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her with uncomfortable intensity. "You're here to stop us." Aria maintained her cover as a former military pilot seeking thrills, But Jake wasn't fooled. "I know who you are, Commander Blackwood," he said, his tone mixing respect with challenge. "The question is, do you know what you're really dealing with?" What followed was the most eye-opening conversation of Arya's career. Jake didn't just tell her what the hyperspace Hellions were doing, he showed her why. "Hyperspace is dying," he said, leading her to his ship's modified sensor array. "It's been deteriorating for thousands of years. Your precious Federation has been treating the symptoms while ignoring the disease." The data he showed her was impossible to ignore. Hyperspace had indeed been degrading, but so slowly that normal measurements hadn't detected it. The instability wasn't being caused by the racing was revealing instability that had always existed. "We're not breaking hyperspace," Jake insisted. "We're learning to repair it. Each race teaches us something new about how hyperspace actually works. Every disturbance we create reveals new vulnerabilities that need to be addressed." Arya's worldview shifted. Everything she'd believed about hyperspace, everything the Federation had taught her, was incomplete. The racers weren't vandals, they were pioneers, exploring new frontiers of knowledge in ways that previous generations of scientists had never dared attempt. But the cost was terrible. Even as Jake revealed the secrets of hyperspace, alarms began sounding throughout the racing circuit. The Meridian Nebula was collapsing, its hyperspace lanes unraveling in a cascade failure that threatened to engulf the entire sector. "This is it," Jake said, his expression grim. "The big one. If we can't stop this collapse, it'll trigger a chain reaction that will destroy hyperspace throughout the galaxy." The next few hours were a frantic blur of desperate action. The hyperspace Hellions worked alongside Arya's team to combat the spreading collapse, using their ships as buffers to channel the chaotic energy surges into containable patterns. Cassandra, Vale's ship, the Void Dancer, proved to be the key to their success. Her experimental hyperspace core could generate stabilization fields for the collapsing pathways, but to deploy them, she would have to pilot her ship directly into the heart of the chaos. "I've got maybe a 10% chance of survival," she calculated over the com, "but if I don't try, we're all dead anyway." The final race wasn't about speed or competition, it was about sacrifice. Cassandra flew her ship into the disintegrating nebula, using every technique the hyperspace Hellions had developed to survive impossible conditions. Her ship's hull buckled under dimensional stresses, her engines overloaded, but she held her course. It was Jake who saved her in the end, positioning his own ship between the interdimensional feedback and Cassandra's vessel, absorbing the worst of the dimensional shockwaves so she could complete her mission. Both ships were destroyed, but the hyperspace collapse was prevented. The aftermath was complicated. While the Federation publicly condemned the hyperspace Hellions for their reckless actions, privately they recognized that the human pilots had saved the galaxy. The racing circuit was disbanded, but the knowledge gained from their experiments revolutionized hyperspace travel. Dr. Chen led new research initiatives, recruiting former hyperspace Hellions to help develop safer FTL technology. Lieutenant Commander Coral worked to establish a hyperspace monitoring network that could detect instabilities before they became dangerous. Dr. Vasquez founded the Interdimensional Physics Institute, training the next generation of hyperspace specialists. Jake Morrison and Cassandra Vale survived the collapse, but their racing careers were over. They established an academy for advanced hyperspace navigation, teaching Federation pilots the techniques they'd learned through their dangerous experiments. Arya Blackwood was appointed special advisor to the Federation Council and put in charge of the new Hyperspace Safety Directorate, working to stabilize interdimensional travel. But she never forgot the lesson Jake had taught her. Sometimes the people who seem most dangerous are the ones working hardest to save everyone. The hyperspace Hellions had treated the galaxy's most sacred medium as their playground, and in doing so, they had discovered truths that mainstream science had overlooked. They had raced through dimensions, pulling reality along in their wake, and ended up saving the very thing they'd seemed determined to destroy. Hyperspace was stable once more, but it was a different kind of stability, one built on understanding rather than ignorance, on discovery rather than reverence. The pathways between stars pulsed with new energy, carrying spacecraft faster and more safely than ever before in galactic history. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the hyperspace monitoring stations detected unexplained anomalies, the technicians would exchange knowing glances and smile. Someone else was out there, pushing boundaries, learning something new about the universe. The races were over, but the spirit of the hyperspace Hellions lived in every pilot who dared to push their engines beyond safe limits, in every engineer who questioned established principles, in every explorer who looked at the impossible and said, "We can do better," because that's what humans do. They take the stable, the sacred, the untouchable, and improve it, even if they have to break it first, even if it means drag racing through the fabric of reality itself. The galaxy adapted to this truth, and in adapting learned to thrive as never before. The stars remained, waiting to be reached, but now the roots connecting them were stronger, safer, and built on the kind of knowledge that only comes from having the courage to race through chaos. In the end, hyperspace wasn't just stable, was unbreakable, and that made all the difference. When, decades later, new member species joined the Federation and asked about the strange energy patterns that seemed to dance through the fabric of hyperspace, the answer was always the same. Those are just echoes of the day humans learned to fly. The questioners would nod politely and file that information away as something they'd never quite understand. But word would spread through the hyperspace monitoring stations, and across the vast network of interdimensional communication, the message would reach those who did understand. Such reports always made Jake Morrison smile when he heard them. Cassandra Vale, working on calculations for the next generation of hyperspace cores, would pause in her work and remember soaring through pure chaos. And Commander Aria Blackwood, overseeing the galaxy's hyperspace network, would see the readings and know that everything was exactly as it should be. The humans had arrived among the stars as refugees, as primitives who didn't understand the sacred nature of hyperspace. They had disrupted thousands of years of tradition, caused catastrophic failures, and nearly severed the connections between worlds. But they had also shown everyone what hyperspace could become when you stopped treating it like a museum piece and started treating it like a tool. They had taken the stable and made it stronger. They had done what humanity always does, taken the sacred and made it useful. They had made the entire galaxy their race course, and somehow, impossibly, they had made it better. It wasn't lost on anyone who'd survived those chaotic months that the final irony was, perhaps, the cruelest. The species that had nearly destroyed hyperspace had become its greatest protectors. The pilots who had raced through dimensions with reckless abandon became the galaxy's most skilled hyperspace navigators. The humans who had drag raced through the fundamental structure of reality had taught everyone else how to truly fly, and, in the end, that was the most human thing of all, taking something perfect and making it better by nearly destroying it first. It was like taking something steady and shaking it until it broke, then building it back stronger than before. The galaxy came to love them for that, though no one would ever admit it aloud, because deep down, every species that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if there might be something more out there understood the impulse behind the hyperspace hellions, the urge to test limits, to push against the universe and see how far you could go before it said no. The difference was that humans were the first species to hear the universe say no and respond with a simple question: "Are you sure?" And then they had proven that no, the universe wasn't sure at all. The stars remained, gleaming in the darkness, connected by pathways humming with new energy. Hyperspace was stable again, stronger than before, carrying ships across the galaxy, at speeds that would have been impossible before humanity learned to navigate the currents of chaos. The hyperspace hellions were gone, but their legacy lived on in every jump, every transition, every moment when a ship winked out of normal spacetime and emerged somewhere entirely new. They had drag raced across the wavelengths of reality itself, and they had won. The universe was still figuring out how that was possible, but the humans knew. They'd always known. Sometimes when you can't fix something, the best approach is to break it so thoroughly that you have to rebuild it better than it was before, and sometimes the most dangerous people are those who love something enough to risk everything to save it. The hyperspace hellions had loved the stars so much that they'd risked destroying the very connections that bound them together, and in the process, they'd built better pathways than anyone had ever dreamed possible. The galaxy was better for it. The galaxy was stronger because of them. The galaxy was faster because of them, and when ships jumped through hyperspace, gliding along the stabilized pathways they had helped create, the universe whispered their names. Jake Morrison, warrior turned artist turned scientist; Cassandra Vale, who had built machines capable of surfing through chaos itself; Commander Aria Blackwood, who had learned that sometimes the best way to save the galaxy was to let it evolve; and all the others, the pilots and engineers and dreamers, who had never seen a sacred river when they looked at hyperspace, but a racetrack crying out for the thunder of engines. They had drag raced across dimensions, and won. The universe was still trying to understand what that meant, but the humans knew. They'd always known. You can't keep a good species down, especially When they've figured out how to fly through the spaces between spaces, tearing through the very structure of reality itself, the stars were waiting, the paths were open, and somewhere, echoing through the fabric of hyperspace, that laughter still rang out, laughter that had announced to the universe a fundamental truth. This was a playground for the spirit, not a prison. That was what the hyperspace Hellions had taught them, and the galaxy would never be the same.